There's a mystery to be solved about colobus monkeys and genetic diversity. Colobus monkeys reside in U.S. zoos, like the Colobus guerzo species at the St. Louis Zoo.
An interesting fact about colobus monkeys is that the word colobus comes from the Greek word mutilated, and that's because colobus monkeys actually don't have a thumb. That lack of thumb is helpful in their locomotion.
Colobus guerzo monkeys are similar to the Peters Angolan colobus monkeys, brought to the U.S. from East Africa, becoming the first generation of their kind to inhabit zoos in the 80s.
In terms of Peters Angolan colobus, so the specific subspecies I'll be studying, they live in the coastal forests in southern Kenya and throughout Tanzania in the eastern Arc Mountains and southern highlands.
In order to better understand their needs and to protect them in the wild, scientists at Washington University in St. Louis are teaming up with the St. Louis Zoo and the Colobus Conservation. Assistant Professor of Biological Anthropology Emily Wroblewski and her team are analyzing DNA samples.
So we have the fun job of isolating DNA from fecal samples, and this allows us to access wild populations without dramatically interfering with them.
I'll be obtaining samples that have already been collected from Tanzania, and I will be helping to facilitate the collection of the samples from the zoo, as well as assisting in the genetic lab work, genetic analysis.
The team is isolating mitochondrial DNA samples. It's a type of DNA inherited from the mother.
And what's useful about this DNA is mitochondrial DNA are present in multiple copies, thousands of copies within the cell. So when we're trying to get DNA out of feces, that's an advantage.
They want genetic information to answer key questions.
Genetically, it's very helpful because it mutates at a pretty high, steady rate. And so that mutation rate allows us to look at differences between populations, species, subspecies, and estimate how different or similar, how related those populations are.
Scientists want to know how genetically different the monkeys are across their range, and where exactly did the captive species in U.S. zoos come from?
The best records weren't always kept in terms of where they actually originated from. In thinking about these animals that are quite diverse and wanting to manage their breeding and genetic diversity, it's helpful to understand their origins, and potentially if there's two different subspecies, they may make breeding decisions based on who to reproduce with to best replicate what we would observe in the wild.
Determining how the U.S. descendants fit into the larger family tree requires samples from Angolan colobus monkeys in the wild.
No matter what we find, it's helpful. So one of the questions is whether the animals in between Kenya and Tanzania represent one subspecies that just has a range of variation across that habitat that they have, or whether they actually are two distinct subspecies. And so this will help us resolve that question. But regardless of whether they ultimately end up being deemed one species or two, that genetic information that we have about these specific populations that we're targeting will still be informative for conservation efforts.
Understanding genetic diversity would help conservationists protect wild colobus monkeys threatened by hunting, habitat loss, disease, and climate change. And it would help zoo management tailor requirements so the monkeys may flourish in zoo habitats. For HEC, I'm Kathleen Berger.